It's good to know you're with us on Earn Exchange. And like Temple Barrah informed you earlier, that we're tilting the conversation away from the BRICS now to global debts because global debt surged to a staggering $315 trillion. That's a lot of money, but it has far reaching economic implications that vary depending on the region that you're in. So, for developing countries, the implication of this global high debt level differs from developing countries. But let's look at the general cause of this soaring high debt level for us. We know that the world just a few years ago moved away from the COVID-19 pandemic. And then there's also been, for some countries, relaxed monetary policies which have encouraged borrowing, among other economic factors, because the Ukraine-Russian war has its own implication. Conflict in some parts of the world too has had its fair share of implication on several other nations, resulting to an economic downturn for some countries. These are some of the reasons why the global debt level is increasing, and for now it's put at $315 trillion. But we have someone who will be looking at the issue with us. Like I said, that the implication for regions of the world differ depending on the development and exposure to this debt. So, joining us virtually on the conversation this morning will be one who is a tax practitioner and also the vice chairman of the tax practitioners in the FCT in Nigeria. I'm talking about Dr. Benjamin Inamudu, who is chairman FCT Tax Practitioners. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this beautiful Tuesday morning on an exchange.
Well, I hear that Dr. Benjamin has not been able to link with us because he's joining us virtually, of course, from Abuja. And yes, you mentioned COVID-19. You've talked about the recent Russia-Ukraine war. What else? I think there was one other one.
Oh, okay. Relaxed monetary policies
Yeah,
for some
relaxed monetary
countries that
policies.
do not really have a high inflation rate. So that's also led to increased borrowings.
So it's safe to say that the world has gone through a lot.
Oh, yes.
The world has suffered a lot of emotional and economic trauma.
Mm.
And of course, it's unique. I find it also, interesting that some of the things happening in corners of the world, not very close to, where we are at the moment, also has far-reaching effects on us as well. For example, two countries warring, the Russia, Ukraine, and then all of the embargoes and all of the sanctions that have been placed on Russia, the fact that there were trade blockades and all that has had an adverse effect on other countries that depend on those countries for, certain basic needs.
You just connected the dots when you said depends. Some of the countries that depend on these two countries for basic needs are affected. You know what they say about the world being a global village. So
Yeah.
what happens in your community somehow spreads to other communities by way of dependence.
And of course, even some other countries depend on Russia for oil, and you realize that even developed countries depended on Russia, and so price of gas, oil went up for countries in Europe, and then in Africa, you begin to wonder this could have this kind of effect or this level of effect on European countries. I mean, more. What more could Africans experience who probably even dependent on them for means of sustenance when it comes to food, imports, and all of that. Well,
I find that somehow an irony because for Africa to be depending on Russia for food, but that's the real life situation.
mm,
You know, they depend on Russia and Ukraine for grains, which Africa consumes a lot. Given the nature of the African land, of course, Africa has lots of arable
arable land,
land,
and you'd
but
expect.
oh yes, and but a lot of it is uncultivated, and because Africa largely still does the subsistence farming, you know, the kind of farming for me, myself, and my family. I
Yeah.
don't want to say myself and I. So it's you just being able to feed your family. In some instance, not
Commercializing.
even able to feed your family very well. Maybe
It's you
if it's
feel like we
vegetables,
take
you just
farming like
have
for hobby. You just have two birds in your cage,
hmm,
or you just have a
max
portion of
like
land
10.
where you just plant some cassava stems,
Mm-hmm.
and then the harvest is not enough to make processed garri that will last you for even 6 months.
So you still
You
need to
still
buy
you
from
need
the
to
other
buy,
families.
so and then when it's maize season, you cultivate on the same portion of
Mm.
land, and then the maize you just roast and boil, and within 1 month you've consumed all the maize that
If it lasts you up to a month.
so it's just the dynamism is something I've not been able to wrap my head around, and
Mm.
why it is so, especially considering the fact that, I mean, I've noticed that some persons can plant cucumber in the southern part of Nigeria, yet we get to still depend on the northern part of Nigeria to provide large
Mm.
numbers of those vegetables, tomatoes, cucumbers, watermelon, and you wonder, um, with the desert encroachment, how are they able to manage that? Especially the fact that the lands are richer down south, closer to the ocean, and are more arable. And then you would expect that planting can be done in larger quantities. Okay, we had plantations of palm fruits, towards this in the south, long time ago, early 90s, late 80s. But then all of that has gone away. No, no. How many states can boast of palm oil as a major source of revenue for them? I mean, yes, people are still farming palm, the products in oil and of course kernels. But then when we've not lived up to the potentials of what we can gain from producing, farming in large expanse of land, producing in large quantities, and even exporting outside Nigeria, even to neighboring African countries to start with, to as compared to. And I hear that people who are in diaspora, who are abroad, cook with red oil a lot. And so they can pay a huge amount to actually get these finished products. But then who's thinking in that direction?
Hmm. So, who's thinking in that direction and who should be thinking in that direction? Those are very vital questions to ask. It's about interest for one. So you've described the kind of land we have in the
Yeah.
north and the challenges that they have with farming,
Yes.
not even having as much urban lands as we have in the south, in the western part of Nigeria, but yet they are more inclined towards farming or towards agriculture than
Yeah.
those in other parts of Nigeria. So it's about the interest. We're not very intentional about our development, so our development is not systemic. While there is urbanization and there is the move of people from rural areas where a lot of agricultural activities happen,
Yeah.
there is no planning as to what happens if people move into urban centers. What activity is left for those in the rural areas, because those in the villages are seen to they somehow feel like, oh, because the opportunity hasn't come for them to move to the urban areas. If it does show up, then off they go to urban areas. But those in the urban centers need food to survive, and so it's left for those in the rural areas to produce this food, but they do so in little ways. But in the north, they've taken farming, they've taken agriculture as core business.
Yeah.
So you can have somebody have several farms, employ different people who do not even own the land to mass produce, so that they sell these produce down to the south and to the west, to the east, and also export out of Nigeria. But how many people are doing that in other parts of Nigeria? So that's a systemic thing. But where the question of who should go into farming comes in, because we're people who still wait for government largely to provide structure for a lot of things, then perhaps it should have been the ministry. It should be government through the different ministries of agriculture spearheading these things, not really doing the farming, but maybe creating the platform or the organization for people to pull together. So I want to be a farmer, you want to be a farmer, but both of us do not have enough land for the kind of farming we want to do. This is where the Ministry of Agriculture comes in. They pull together different farmers with same interest. It could be cassava farmers. And so the government helps secure land because, of course, government, no one has land more than government. And government says this portion of land or this mass of land, you can have access to it to farm cassava so that we know that as a state, this is our project. We intend to give ourselves a target, maybe Lagos State, for instance, and say in the next, I don't want to use Lagos State because Lagos State doesn't have much land for farming. Let's say Ogun State or maybe Edo State, Delta State, one of the states can say, we want to be one of the
Let's say
first
if I
three
may, if
suppliers of cassava
let's
nationally
even
before
put
even
Lagos
going.
in the mix. You have fish farming.
Oh, yes, because Lagos is a coastal area, so there's
Exactly.
abundance of water. And the kind of variety of fishes that you have in Lagos, report has it that you barely find those variety in other parts of Nigeria. So what happens or what is wrong with Lagos concentrating
Hanese.
in fish farming and supplying? You know how much of money Nigeria spends on importing fishes from different parts
Yeah,
of the
people
world.
also, will tell you they want a certain species of prawns from a
Mhm,
certain part of Nigeria.
mhm.
That in quotes in the local parlance, that one they sweet pass.
That's
And
luxury.
yes, that's luxury. But then why can't we have these things abundant in within the country? First and foremost, it's still the same thing that we're complaining about petrol being insufficient for the consumers, especially considering the fact that we are a crude oil producing nation who exports this crude. And then we are producing crude, rather, or would you say we are tapping crude oil? I mean,
So you doubt that we're producing crude. Why? Is it because Nigeria still falls short of the quota it should be producing?
well, I'm saying, can't we even provide for ourselves first?
Hmm.
Because it feels like everything where we have, we're unable to harness abundance of food, abundance of natural resources, abundance of human resources. Yet people, the unemployment rate is low, and if you look at the policies, you've talked about the fact that the Ministry of Agriculture can come up with ideas where people can actually have portions or hectares assigned to them, and you take responsibility, and you could be saying, oh, we're leaving you to farm okra, you farm maize, and some of these crops that have seasons, right? Within season you do, and then you practice rotational cropping, and after a while you move around, and you come, instead of maize at that same spot, you plant something else, maybe vegetables and all that. So
Interestingly, you know that the world has even moved away from those kind of farming, rotational farming, the ones that we learned while studying a Greek
yeah,
science in primary, secondary schools. There is sustainable agriculture now,
yeah.
even in areas where you do not have very high rainfall, where you do not have waters abundant in natural resource. There's a way to go about these things. How is the Ministry of Agriculture keyed into these things? These are part of the reasons why you find that countries that have been intentional and strategic about what they need, what they do about the resources that they have, translating them from just resources into actual supply of their basic needs, are the ones making money from countries who have these resources, but they just like to, maybe it's like someone who has money in the bank. So the feeling of knowing that you have money in the bank is enough for you,
Mm,
as opposed to someone who knows they have money in the bank or don't even have money in the bank, but can do business that makes you withdraw that money from your bank and give to them. So they have more money than you, who just has yours lying fallow in the bank. So that's why you find that the developed countries are still the ones supplying basic necessities
yeah.
to developing countries that have the resources but are not doing much with the resources. So that explains why the debt level and the impact of this high debt level on the regions of the world are different. So one is a receiver, the other is a supplier.
So if you take a look at 20 countries, top 20 countries by debt, you realize that it's even the developed countries
Mm.
that are the highest debtors. The United States, for instance, has 32 trillion in debt. China 14 trillion, Japan 13, Germany 4, India 3.5, United Kingdom 3, France 3, Italy 2.7, Brazil, Canada, Russia, Australia, South Korea, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Spain, Turkey, Argentina, South Africa, and Indonesia in that order. Now, if you put that side by side with the top countries by gross domestic product (GDP), United States still stands on top of that list. I
Mm.
mean, I find it I don't know, a little bit confusing. What's the correlation? Your
Okay.
GDP is high, your debt level profile is high.
I'll just use this layman expression to try to explain it. You know what they say: to whom much is given,
Mm,
much expected. So this countries, developed countries, have high debt level. They also have high GDP. So where's the link between both of them? Let's explain the high debt level first. Where does the debt go to? They're highly industrialized nations.
yeah,
So there's a lot of infrastructure um, that needs funding. That explains part of it. Look at the way the economy is. So while Africa has a youth population, but it's not doing much with the youth population, some of those countries have aging population. So
yeah,
when you have aging population, what comes with it is that what you spend on healthcare is quite high. What you
hmm,
spend on pension is high as well. That shoots up your debt level as well. And then inflation is there hitting every country from different center. We also have the the monetary policy that we talked about
yeah,
earlier, making borrowing easy. For US, you understand that a lot of people in the US have credit cards. They live on borrowing.
exactly.
There is a mortgage thing too. Unlike what you have in developing countries rather, where if you have to buy a house, so you go with the full amount of money needed and then you pay
If you had
upfront.
to pay rent,
If you have to pay rent, there's no such thing as, oh, I'm going to pay in bits. I'm going to do installmental payments. You pay upfront. But in those countries, there's a credit system that works. So that's debt too. That citizens borrowing for what they need. That's part of the reason why you have that. And according to their GDP, of course, they're highly productive. So it explains they have a high GDP, but lifestyle, the way the economy runs, the kind of infrastructure that they have and projects that they embark upon also gives them a high debt level. But for them, the very developed countries, is not as much a big deal as it is for developing countries. A country like US, of course, they can meet their debt obligations, they can service their debt because they also have a high GDP. Money comes, they're making money from different. They have different stay. The economy has different stays, so of course, revenue keeps coming in. They have a high revenue. And also, they've been able to
okay,
explore the
that's
tax system
exactly. I was coming to that
where
point.
you find that the corporations are paying high taxes as opposed to what you find in developing countries where the tax system is not structured in the way that a lot or much is gotten from the companies that should be paying high taxes. So we still do the informal tax thing where there's tickets for Nigeria, for example, Nigeria, tickets are given to those in the formal sector. And so there's a lot of tax leakages that doesn't come into government coffers. Government is short on revenue. Unlike developed countries that have been able to organize their tax system, have been able to organize a production system. They have more that they export than they import. So in balance of trade, the trade balances, there's not as much trade deficit as you will find in developing countries. So this are some of the things that explains why you have it there for developing countries having high debt level but having
Yeah,
a high
the
GDP.
GDP.
So like I was saying that for them it's not much of a big deal in terms of servicing the debt, being able to improve the economy, being able to improve infrastructure, while still having a debt level. But for African countries, which when you say developing countries, you want to just quickly go there because many countries in Africa are developing. They're struggling with high debt level that is even a hindrance to economic growth because government doesn't have enough to provide the funds needed for basic necessities, basic things that the citizens would need. So it's more of a burden for even developing countries with less. When you look at the figure seems less as to what you have for developed countries.
Well, let's take a look at some top 20 countries by tax revenue. Of course, Blessing had mentioned that some of those indicators actually contribute to the high debt profile and, of course, the GDP. So, the United States, out of the first 10 position, currently 17th or 16th rather, with 27%. But on top of the list is Denmark as the top country with tax revenue as a percentage of GDP, putting it at 46%. It means they've been able to maximize, I'm right, income generated from tax, and that stands at 46%. France is 45%, Belgium is 43, Sweden is 42, Finland 41, Austria is 41, Italy is 40, Norway 39, Germany 37, Netherlands 37, United Kingdom 35, Spain 35, Canada 33, Japan 31, Australia 30, United States 27, South Korea 25, Brazil 24, India 86, China 16. And, listen, I'm trying to imagine that.
There are names of countries you yet to call. Where are the African countries?
Exactly. So it means that, okay, well, what I wanted to, talk about is the fact that this might have some sort of, I don't want to use the word negative, it might take a toll on the citizens of this country. The fact that these countries were able to maximize income generated from tax. So, would you attribute this to heavy taxing on citizens of these countries?
Oh yes, that's part of it. You know what? One of the first things that shock Nigerians when they relocate to developed countries in search of greener pastures, is a tax system.
Yeah.
In Nigeria, where meanwhile there is no, we don't have much formal tax that people pay, except maybe you're a government employee, maybe you work in the corporate system, or you have a business, and so there are returns. You need to file your tax returns, but you don't pay tax on almost every amenity that you make use of.
Yeah.
So one of the shock that greets those who move from this part of the world to other parts of the world, developed countries, is that they have to pay tax for this, tax for that. So at the end of the month, after when they get their paycheck, they take out tax. It's like half of the money is gone or more than half. So, but why the citizens can pay and still pay the taxes is because they see what the tax is put to, the use of the taxes. So it sort of gives governments or their government the right to demand that the taxes are paid. The taxes are high, oh yes, but the citizens see what the taxes are being used for, where they go to, and so they feel the obligation to pay. Not just feeling the obligation, they are obligated to pay. The level of tax evasion is quite low there because the escape routes are very slim. The chances of you evading tax and not being caught is very slim. So that's what they've been able to do with their tax system, despite having a high tax system. But the taxes work for the taxpayers, and that's why sometimes hear them say taxpayers' money, or this has been done with taxpayers' money. But how many projects can Nigerians, for example, point to and say this has been done with taxpayers' money? So there's ownership because the money comes from the citizens.
Well, there's just a whole lot to digest from all of this, but I think what's important is the fact that some of these developing countries, despite the fact they have high debt profile, have been able to also grow their GDP. And yet, it's also surprising to take note of the United States, that despite the fact that they stand atop, on countries with high GDP, they've not taxed their citizens so much. Could that be as a result of the fact that the credit system is allowed to play, in the United States, and most persons just seem to live on borrowed cash? Would you also say they're living on borrowed life?
Yes. I mean, let's call it what it is. If most of the things that you have, if the basic things that you have are funded by the credit card, and some of them have even gone bad in it, that the credit card no longer works because they've
Okay.
maxed out their credit card, and they're yet to repay some of those loans. They're yet to pay back
Mortgages and
the
all that.
mortgages, and they have mortgages waiting to be paid and all of that. But it's what they've been used to. But the idea was actually to give them some comfort so that things that you need, if you don't have the money at that moment, you can actually afford them. But it has also bred for them uh, some lazy people
Don't
amongst
don't you
them.
think that's why we have a lot of people who want to migrate to the United States, where they want to live the American dream?
Hmm.
Your health care is taken care of once you can get into the system. You have a social security number. You've got free health care. You've got free education, or you pay a subsidized rate for education, and then you can even get stipends from government, especially
You
in
get
times of
food
crisis and
stamps,
all that. There's also food stamps. There's some sort of accommodation
the shelter.
shelter arrangement when you're out of home. And in all of this, like you said, you're breeding lazy generation. But then they've been able to ensure that they keep people off the street. Um, what has that done for the economy of the United States? Is evidence that you see a shocking high debt
Hmm.
profile of over $30 million. But then I'm sure policymakers are trying so hard, because you could not help but give them kudos in maintaining that high GDP. And of course, the resultant effect is much more persons knocking on the borders to allow them come into the United States of America.
Hmm. Oh yes, but there are two sides to a coin. So while the United States government is trying to be responsible, it's trying to be a big father, father with a very generous heart that can take care of the needs of all of his children. The economy is also paying for it because the debt profile there suggests that so much money, the economy is bleeding. How much can they sustain that? That's another issue. Now, another thing too that is also shooting up the debt profile of the US is that the US, being the big brother that they try to play, is, in so many countries trying to broker peace. If they're not the ones fighting, oh, so they have the UN has the peacekeeping mission there. So they're sending aid to different
Yeah.
countries and all of that. Those are part of it. But the thing is, those who want to live the American dream, who want to get over to America and begin to enjoy that, the truth of the matter is, you don't get to the US as an immigrant today and begin to enjoy all of that.
Yeah.
There's a process to it. It takes time and it takes a process to it. It depends on how you're coming in, what is the level that what kind of documents do you have. So if you come in thinking, because you watch movies and you find Americans enjoying this, they go over to a grocery shop and then they just pull out a credit card, they're able to purchase things for which they do not have money, or they live in a fancy house because they've taken a mortgage, and so they can now have a home of their own. By the time they get there, the shock that has greeted some people who actually traveled with a mindset of, oh, education is paid for,
It's going to be
healthcare.
a jolly ride, a smooth
Yes.
journey.
So that's why you find that when they get there, some of them are shocked. They now have to work two jobs, three jobs to measure up. And some are even on the streets. So it's not as rosy as it seems. Even for Americans who are citizens, it is not just as easy as people think it is.
Well, the good thing is that Africans are willing to put in the hours to earn the wage, and the United States has been able to put in place a wage system where you have an average wage pay, and so you don't have employers exploiting people. So if the average wage is about $20 and you work for
Per
8 or
hour.
10 hours, you're getting about 200, and then you send 100 back home, which of course, the last time we talked about
Mhm. That's for remittance.
that sorry remittances, you now have someone comfortably sending such huge amount. They want to do some investments while they live a shackled life to some extent, working so hard. And I mean, if we had that system in place in Nigeria, let's bring it back home, where there was an average pay, and say you earn 1,000 naira every hour you work, and for 8 hours you earn 8,000 naira. That's your typical 8 to 4 or 9 to 5, and 8,000 times four. I'll beg your pardon. 5 days in a week is 40,000 naira, and then times four.
Wicks.
4 weeks is 160,000 naira. You tend to, is that 40? Okay, 4 times 4, 16, yeah,
Yes.
160,000 naira as an average pay.
That's against 70,000 there
It
per
makes a
month,
lot. I mean,
minimum wage.
1,000 naira. I'm using 1,000 as the yardstick here. And so you're getting 160,000 naira. You have some sukkah. I mean, it might not be all rosy, but then it's something that you could go home with and take care of your family, right? And as you progress, as you get your wage gets better, but then that's on the average.
Mm.
And in comparison to what it is in the US, it's still not there yet. But then it will also reduce, the migration of Nigerians, the Jawa syndrome. It gives the people a lot more comfort. And then people wouldn't be looking for how to borrow to sustain, because loan sharks are having a field day at Nigerians because of how attractive they make, or how easy they make the loan taking, with their app. So you just log in, take, and then you'll now become very frustrated by them trying to see if they can get back their money and all that. So
Mm.
it's just a lot with the ripple effects telling on Nigerians, and of course the economy, because nobody's banking their monies anymore. People don't
People still bank their money.
Eh,
Maybe not as
there's
much
certain
people
class,
would.
but then how much do you even have
The
deposited
savings
in the
culture you're
bank?
talking about.
Yes.
Oh, yes. While we cannot do the hourly wage in Nigeria, but there's the daily wage. Then in the informal sector, there are still people who earn daily. So it's standard. If you do a day's job, maybe particularly for those who are in the building industry. So maybe they say it's 4,000 naira for a day's job, depending on what kind of service you're offering. That's there, but it's not a standard thing because we have not really put standard to a lot of things in Africa and in Nigeria, particularly. We've not really put standard to things that, oh, for every sector, these are the rules and this is how it happens. So it's left at the discretion of certain industries, certain organizations to determine how the pay goes. But even if the government decide, for instance, to make it legal or put a law that for every hour of work, this is how much the employers are to pay.
Yeah.
It then comes to the question of how many employers can pay that, because there are other dynamics to it. So the employers have to factor in the cost of production, their overhead cost at the end of the day, which the absence of certain infrastructure has shut up. So even the employers are struggling to keep their businesses afloat. And that's why you find that there is layoff in some organizations. Layoffs are going on in some organizations. So those who are there, who are fortunate to still have their job, will take whatever is coming than even demand for a certain amount of money to be paid as daily wage or as hourly wage. So there are a lot of issues to this. It's like one connects to the other, and it all has effect on the other. The global high debt level is also impacting African countries because it restricts the amount of fund that
Yeah.
African countries can access,
Access.
whether through borrowing or through grants, through funds that can come in, and even businesses that have dealings, connections in other parts of the world. So it's a web that connects everybody, and that's why it's a global issue for global leaders to sit and find how to go about this. But one way to actually tackle it would be for developing countries to find a way of becoming less dependent on developed countries. That's a way to cut your spending. And when you cut your spending, you can, to an extent, manage the debts that you have. And government by its too also need to cut down its spending, cut cost of governance so that what comes into government can be used for other productive ventures and not used for recurrent expenditure because when you check the Nigerian budget, the Nigerian government budget, you find that recurrent expenditure far more outweighs capital expenditure. Let's take a break. On the return, we'll be having our guest, and then we can look at how countries can help to reduce the impact of a global high debt level. $315 trillion. That's a lot. All right, I guess you're set to meet our guest on the show today, but that will be in the next edition of Early Exchange. We'll bring in someone to look at the issues as it concerns global high debt level. For today, the show is done. Many thanks for watching. I am Blessing Eichie. Be sure to follow us on our social media platforms at Sook News TV on Facebook, on X, on Instagram. Leave a comment. The conversation always continues with you sharing your thoughts. TC.
Well, it's been a great moment. Of course, the exchange has been shook. I'd like to describe it that way because, of course, a little bit of understanding the correlation between the GDP, tax, and, of course, high debt profile. I hope you've learned one or two. And, of course, that's what we intend to achieve with the program Early Exchange. So do join us same time, of course, right here on Sweet News Television. And we will definitely appreciate your feedback and questions. Always appreciate that. My name is Temple Barrah, and as usual, many thanks to everyone who has ensured that you can receive us crisp, loud, and clear. Until we come your way again, bye for now, and don't forget to tune in to Market Insight at 11.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.